The candlelight flickered against the glass walls of their modern home, reflecting a version of Ethan Mwangi he didn't quite recognize anymore. Across the table, Lydia smiled faintly, her eyes soft but distant. 10 years of marriage, a decade that began with promise and laughter, now sat between them like an invisible wall neither dared to acknowledge. He had spent the day rehearsing how to appear normal, how to hold her gaze when to smile, how to sound like the man she once loved. He told himself he was doing this for peace, to keep things from falling apart before he was ready. But deep down, Ethan knew the truth. He had already left her long before tonight. The dinner table was perfectly set. White roses in a crystal vase, her favorite dish steaming softly, the faint hum of jazz from the living room. Lydia had worked all afternoon to make it special, though he hadn't noticed at first. She wore a red dress he used to adore, one she hadn't touched in years. "You're quiet tonight," she said finally, cutting through the silence. Ethan's fork paused midair. "Just tired," he lied, forcing a smile. "Tired," she echoed, her tone light but her eyes searching. "You've been tired a lot lately." He felt her gaze on him like heat. He reached for his wine, hoping the bitter taste would anchor him. "It's just work, Lydia. Big projects, long hours. You know how it is." Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "I used to know." The words hung in the air like smoke. Ethan looked away, staring at the painting behind her, a piece he had once designed for her charity office. It reminded him of who he used to be, ambitious, kind, hungry for meaning. Now, all he wanted was escape. He stood, walked to the window, and watched the night press against the glass. The city lights glittered beyond, cold and distant. He thought about Maya, the scent of her hair, the way she made him feel alive again. For a fleeting second, guilt crept in. Lydia didn't deserve this. Not her. But then he remembered her suspicion, the way she questioned his late nights, and his guilt hardened into irritation. Behind him, Lydia's voice softened. "Do you remember our first anniversary? The rain, the power cut, you made tea by candlelight. You said it was perfect because we had nothing but each other." Ethan turned slowly, meeting her eyes. There was a quiet ache in them. Hope, maybe, or the last traces of it. He wanted to say something kind, something to fill the space between them, but the words refused to come. "I remember," he said instead, his tone colder than he meant. She looked down, cutting her food with trembling hands. "I keep wondering when we stop being on the same side." The sentence struck him harder than he expected. He clenched his jaw, unable to answer. The clock ticked, marking seconds that felt heavier with each one. Then Lydia stood, collecting their plates. Her movements were calm, deliberate, too deliberate. "Happy anniversary, Ethan," she said quietly without looking at him. "Maybe next year will be better." But they both knew there wouldn't be a next year. He watched her walk away, the hem of her dress swaying softly. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air, jasmine and something older, familiar, like nostalgia mixed with grief. For a long moment, he just stood there, the silence pressing against him until it felt like a weight. In the distance, thunder murmured. Rain began tapping against the glass, faint at first, then steady. Ethan stared out at the storm and felt a strange certainty settle in his chest, that something had already been set in motion. By the time he blew out the candles, Lydia was gone from the room, and the house felt colder than ever. The rain had stopped by morning, but the house still smelled of last night's storm. Ethan stood at the window, coffee cooling in his hand, watching the driveway shimmer under weak sunlight. Lydia had already left for her charity office without a word. The silence she left behind was heavier than her presence. He checked his phone. A message blinked at the top of the screen. "Can I see you today?" It was from Maya. His heart thudded once, a pulse of forbidden relief. He typed quickly. Same place. Noon. By 11. He was driving across the city, leaving the quiet suburb behind for the raw hum of downtown. He parked beside an art cafe tucked between tall, gray buildings, their usual hideout. Inside, the air smelled of roasted beans and rain-damp wood. She was already there, sitting by the window. Maya looked up, smiling in that way that made him forget who he was supposed to be. Her short black curls framed her face, her dark eyes bright and reckless. She wore one of his shirts under her coat, a secret she loved to flaunt. "You're late," she teased. "Traffic," he said, though they both knew he'd sat in the car for 10 minutes. Convincing himself to go in, she leaned closer across the table. "You didn't answer my last message." "I couldn't," he said softly. "Lydia was home." The name hung in the air like a crack of thunder. Maya's smile faltered. "You always say that." He reached for her hand, fingers brushing hers lightly. "You know it's complicated." Her expression shifted, a mixture of longing and resentment. "It's been a year, Ethan. How long can something be complicated?" "You promised." He cut her off gently. "I will. Just not yet." She's suspicious. Last night, she looked at me like she knew. Maya stared at him, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Then maybe it's time she does." Ethan pulled back slightly, shaking his head. "No, you don't understand. If she finds out now, everything falls apart. My firm, the contracts, everything I built. We have to be careful." There it was, the invisible wall between them, built not from love but self-preservation. Maya sighed and looked out the window. The street outside glistened with puddles, people rushing past with umbrellas. "I'm tired of being your secret," she said finally. Ethan wanted to tell her she wasn't, that she meant more to him than she realized. But lies had started to feel heavier lately. Instead, he said, "Just give me time." Maya's lips trembled as she smiled, but her eyes betrayed disappointment. "Time," she repeated, turning the word into something fragile. He reached across again, brushing her wrist. Her pulse was fast. "You trust me, don't you?" She hesitated before nodding. "I do." But in her heart, a small doubt had begun to form, one she couldn't quite silence. They left separately, as always. Maya disappeared into the crowd. Ethan waited before following, keeping distance like a man fleeing from the evidence of his own weakness. Driving back, guilt pressed on his chest like a slow weight. He told himself he could manage this. Lydia's growing suspicion, Maya's restless hope. He had balanced both worlds for months. He could do it again. Yet when he reached home, Lydia's car was still in the driveway. Through the open window, he heard her voice on the phone, low, trembling. "Yes, I just need to know if he's been there after hours," she said. "Yes, I'll pay you for the information." Ethan froze. Her tone wasn't angry. It was wounded, cautious, the voice of someone confirming what they already feared. He stepped back quietly, every muscle tightening. The life he'd built on precision and control now wavered on the edge of exposure. Inside, Lydia ended the call and stared at her reflection in the mirror, her eyes red, her jaw trembling. Somewhere deep inside, she still hoped to be wrong. Ethan closed the door softly, pretending he hadn't heard. But the weight of her suspicion followed him down the hall, settling into his chest like a curse. By nightfall, the storm outside had returned, echoing the one building within their home. Silent for now, but certain to break. The following days passed in strained silence. Lydia spoke little, moving to the house like a ghost haunting her own life. Ethan noticed how she stopped setting 2 cups of coffee in the morning, how she no longer waited for him at dinner. Her silence said more than any accusation could. He tried to focus on work, but her voice lingered in his mind. "I just need to know if he's been there after hours." The memory of that call gnawed at him, and for the first time, Ethan began to feel cornered. That Friday evening, he came home later than usual. The lights in the house were dim, and a soft classical melody played in the background, one of Lydia's old records, spinning endlessly on the turntable. She was sitting at the dining table, a glass of red wine half empty in front of her. "You're late," she said without looking up. "Traffic," he muttered, loosening his tie. Her eyes lifted slowly, meeting his. "I called your office." Ethan's heart skipped. "And they said you haven't stayed late in weeks." He froze, his face carefully blank. They must have misunderstood. Lydia let out a soft, bitter laugh. "Must have." She stood, circling the table to face him. "Do you know what's worse than lying, Ethan? Thinking I'm too naive to notice." He looked away, jaw tightening. "You're overthinking again." "Overthinking?" she snapped. I can smell her perfume on your jacket. I can tell when you stop hearing me halfway through a sentence. Do you really think I would know? He turned sharply. What do you want from me, Lydia? To admit something that isn't true, just to make you feel justified? I want the truth, she said quietly. Not the version you rehearse in front of the mirror. Ethan's control began to fray. The pressure, the guilt, the fear of losing everything. It all coiled inside him until his voice rose before he could stop it. You always need to know everything. You can't let anything breathe without tearing it apart. She flinched, her voice trembling. And you can't love anyone without destroying them first. The words struck him like a slap. For a moment, they both just stared. Two people who once promised forever, now standing on the edge of something irreversible. Lydia turned away, setting her wine glass down with trembling hands. If you're seeing her, end it. If you're not, then prove it. Because if I find out you've been lying again, I'll ruin you, Ethan. I'll tell every one of your clients who you really are. Ethan's breath came shallow. The threat wasn't empty. Lydia was respected, well-connected. Her voice carried weight. He imagined the headlines, the whispers, the collapse of everything he'd built. His mind began to spiral. He stepped closer, lowering his tone. You don't mean that. Her eyes met his, cold, determined. Try me. Something in him snapped. In that instant, the fragile mask he'd worn for months cracked beyond repair. Rage surged through the cracks, not loud, but cold and controlled, like ice forming on water. You think you can control everything, he said, voice low. Even me? Lydia stood her ground, though her voice wavered. I just want my husband back. The man who didn't lie. That man doesn't exist anymore, he whispered. For a long, unbearable second, neither moved. Then Lydia picked up her phone and turned toward the hallway. Maybe the police will help me find out where you've really been. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. Don't, he said. She didn't stop. He reached out, grabbing her wrist. Too hard, too suddenly. The phone slipped from her hand, hitting the floor with a soft crack. They both froze, staring at it. Lydia's voice broke into a whisper. Let me go. He released her, stepping back as she picked up the phone. Her hand shook, but her gaze was steady. You need to leave before you do something you'll regret. Ethan turned away, his throat tight with anger and fear. The storm outside had begun again, rain lashing the windows. In the reflection of the glass, he saw her, standing behind him, shoulders squared, defiant. And somewhere deep inside, he knew that something between them had shattered beyond repair. The next night, that storm would find its way inside the house. The storm arrived earlier than the forecast predicted. Heavy, merciless rain slashing against the windows, thunder rolling like distant drums. The air inside the Mwangi house was dense, thick with silence and something unspoken that clung to every wall. Ethan sat alone in the living room, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. The argument from the previous night replayed in fragments. Her voice, her threat, the look in her eyes. He told himself he hadn't meant to grab her. He told himself she'd push him too far. Yet every excuse tasted bitter. Upstairs, Lydia was packing a small bag. Her hands trembled as she folded a sweater. She had decided she would leave tonight. Not forever, she told herself, just for space, just to breathe. But a part of her already knew she wouldn't come back. Lightning flared through the house, revealing Ethan's reflection in the dark window. Pale, tired, haunted. His phone buzzed on the table. A message from Maya. Are you okay? I've been worried. He stared at it for a long time before typing back. I can't talk right now. Thunder shook the walls. The power flickered, then went out completely. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of rain and Lydia's footsteps moving down the stairs. Ethan stood, the faint glow of his phone lighting his face. Where are you going? His voice came out rougher than he intended. Lydia froze halfway down the staircase, umbrella in hand. To my sister's. I can't stay here tonight. He took a slow step forward. We can talk about this in the morning. There's nothing left to talk about, she said, her tone steady but her eyes glistening. You've already chosen your life, Ethan. I just need to stop pretending I'm part of it. Something inside him twisted painfully. You're being dramatic. You always do this. Turn everything into a performance. Lydia's breath hitched. A performance? You've been performing for months. Playing the perfect husband while sneaking off to her. Do you even remember who you were before all this? He stepped closer, voice sharp, careful. Why? She asked, her voice trembling but firm. Afraid someone might finally see what you really are? The storm raged louder, wind howling through the cracks of the old windows. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. He wanted to end the conversation, to make her stop pushing, stop prying open the parts of him he didn't want to see. Put the bag down, he said quietly. No, Lydia whispered. Not this time. He moved before he thought, his hand shooting out, grabbing her arm. She stumbled, hitting the edge of the banister. Ethan, stop. I didn't. His words tangled in panic as she pulled free, shoving him back. He lost balance for a moment, hitting the table. The whiskey glass shattered, its contents spilling like amber blood across the floor. Lydia backed away, shaking. I'm done being afraid of you. Her words cut deeper than any scream could. Ethan's vision blurred, guilt, rage, confusion folding into one. The storm outside flashed again, bathing them both in a white glare. And then, in a single, disastrous motion, everything unraveled. He reached for her again, trying to stop her from leaving, but his grip was too tight, too desperate. She struggled, slipped, and the sound that followed was unlike anything he had ever heard, a dull, final thud against a marble floor. Time stopped. The rain muted. The thunder faded. Lydia! His voice cracked as he knelt beside her. Her head rested at an unnatural angle, eyes half open, lips parted as if she were about to speak. But no sound came. He pressed his hand to her cheek, then her neck. Nothing. Ethan's breath quickened. No, no, no. He shook her gently, as though the storm could rewind, as though the past 10 seconds could be undone. But the truth was still and cold and staring back at him. Outside, lightning illuminated the room. The shattered glass, the spilled whiskey, the still figure at his feet. And as thunder rolled once more, Ethan whispered the words that would define the rest of his life. It was an accident. But deep down, he already knew the line between accident and intent had long been crossed. Somewhere beyond the roaring storm, the first siren began to wail, faint, far away, and drawing closer. The storm raged until dawn, drowning out the world beyond the walls of the Mwangi home. Ethan sat on the floor beside Lydia's still body, his shirt soaked from rain and sweat. Her skin had already begun to lose its warmth. The seconds passed without meaning. Just the rhythmic thud of his heartbeat and the faint hiss of rain sliding down the window pane. He couldn't remember how long he'd been sitting there. The clock read 4:12 a.m. when his mind finally clawed its way back to coherence. He whispered her name once more, but it sounded foreign in his mouth. Lydia, his wife, gone. Panic surged through him like electricity. He stood abruptly, pacing. Think, he muttered. Think. Every instinct screamed to call someone. The police, an ambulance, anyone. But another thought stopped him cold. What would they see? A man with scratches on his arm, a shattered glass on the floor, a dead wife. No one would believe it was an accident. He saw the headlines already. Architect murders wife in domestic rage. His entire career's reputation, everything he built, gone in an instant. He steadied himself with a deep breath. Then, slowly, a dangerous calm began to form. He wiped his face, looked down at Lydia, and whispered, I can fix this. Ethan dragged her body gently away from the stairs, heart hammering as he avoided looking directly into her eyes. He found an old sheet in the laundry room and wrapped her carefully, methodically, as if detachment could erase guilt. Next, he surveyed the room. Broken glass, spilled whiskey, her purse by the door. He moved mechanically, cleaning every trace, sweeping the glass, mopping the floor, even changing his clothes. He opened windows to let the wind carry out the scent of blood and alcohol. When the house looked untouched, he turned to the hardest part, the scene itself. He unlocked the back door and opened a small side window. Rain had stopped, leaving mud outside. He stepped through the kitchen barefoot, tracking a few wet footprints across the tiles. He overturned the chair, broke the lock on the back gate with a hammer, and whispered himself, "A break-in. That's what they'll think." It was almost convincing. Almost. He carried Lydia's body to the car under the cover of darkness, every step a weight he could barely bear. The night was eerily still now, only the dripping of water from the roof marking time. He laid her gently in the trunk, whispering apologies that came too late. He drove toward the outskirts of the city, past sleeping neighborhoods and empty petrol stations, until the roads turned to gravel. Near an abandoned construction site he'd once managed, he stopped. The place was half-built, half-forgotten, perfect. The rain began again, soft at first. He pulled her from the trunk and laid her near the edge of the unfinished foundation. He hesitated, eyes wet with tears that blurred the world. "I didn't mean this," he said hoarsely. "You made me lose control." The words disgusted him even as he said them. He knew they were lies, thin veils over something much darker. He covered her with loose soil and debris, just enough to conceal her, but not enough to make it look deliberate. It had to seem random, a crime of chance, not passion. When he was done, he stood there in the rain, breathing hard, staring at the spot that used to be his life. Back home, the sky had begun to lighten. The city stirred awake, unaware that something terrible had vanished quietly into the night. Ethan changed into clean clothes, scrubbed his hands until they were raw, and threw the blood-stained sheet into the fireplace. By the time the first knock came at the door, the housemaid arriving early, Ethan was sitting calmly at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. "Morning, sir," she said cheerfully. "Is Madam still sleeping?" He didn't blink. "She left early. Said she had to visit her sister." The maid nodded unfazed and went about her work. Ethan exhaled slowly, steadying his shaking hands under the table. For the first time since the storm began, the world seemed orderly again, quiet, composed, manageable. But beneath the surface of that fragile calm, something in him had shifted forever. As he glanced at the faint mud marks still clinging to the edge of the back door, a small, almost invisible streak of paint caught his eye, a smudge from one of his design projects. He didn't think much of it then. Yet that tiny, careless trace would become the one detail that undid everything. Outside, the morning sun rose, cutting through clouds as if to mock the illusion of perfection he had just created. By Monday morning, the illusion had settled into routine. Ethan went to work as though nothing had happened, reviewing blueprints and attending meetings, each movement deliberate, rehearsed. His co-workers saw only the polished architect they admired, confident, focused, untouchable. But behind that mask, his mind buzzed with a constant hum of fear. Every ring of the office phone made him flinch. Every unexpected sound felt like a warning. That afternoon, he received a call from Lydia's sister. Her voice was calm but uneasy. "Ethan, I've been trying to reach Lydia since Friday night. She hasn't answered my calls. Did she say anything to you?" He paused just long enough to sound natural. "She mentioned visiting a friend in Mombasa. Maybe her phone's off." Silence lingered on the other end. "That doesn't sound like her. She always tells me when she's traveling." Ethan forced a small laugh. "You know how she gets when she needs space. She'll be fine." But by evening, when Lydia still hadn't contacted anyone, her sister filed a missing person report. And the next morning, Detective Amina Dlamini showed up at the Mwangi residence. Ethan opened the door to a woman in her late 30s, composed and sharp-eyed. Her posture was calm, but her presence filled the doorway like authority itself. She flashed her badge, then smiled politely. "Good morning, Mr. Mwangi. I'm Detective Dlamini. I understand your wife hasn't been seen since Friday night." Ethan stepped aside, his pulse drumming. "Yes, that's right. I thought she was at her sister's." The detective entered, her gaze sweeping the room with quiet precision. The polished floors, the neatly arranged shelves, the faint scent of cleaning solution that lingered too strongly. "When was the last time you saw her?" "Friday evening," he said. "We had dinner, and then she said she was leaving for a few days." Dlamini tilted her head slightly. "Did she take her phone?" "Yes." "Her passport?" I'm not sure." Her pen scratched across her notepad. "And there were no arguments before she left?" Ethan smiled tightly. "Nothing serious." Married life, you know. Dlamini studied him for a beat longer than necessary. Of course. She glanced toward the back door. May I take a look around? Of course, he said, masking his panic. She walked through the house slowly, methodically, eyes tracing the kitchen counter, the living room, the stairs. Her footsteps were soft, but Ethan felt them echo through every corner of his mind. When she reached the back door, she crouched slightly, running her fingers along the edge of the frame. Strange, she murmured. The lock looks broken, but the splinter pattern's inward, not outward, almost like it was hit from the inside. Ethan's stomach tightened. Oh, I hadn't noticed. We've had that issue before. Maybe the storm made it worse. Dlamini turned, her expression unreadable. The storm, she repeated softly. Then she smiled again, polite but probing. Well, I'll have a forensics team look into it. Probably nothing. As she moved toward the exit, her eyes fell on a faint smudge near the kitchen floor, a streak of grayish paint barely visible against the tiles. She crouched, tracing it lightly with her gloved finger. You're an architect, right? Yes, Ethan said cautiously. Looks like industrial primer. Not something most households keep around. He laughed nervously. I must have tracked in from work. Maybe, she said. Her tone was casual, but her eyes weren't. When she left, the silence she left behind felt heavier than her presence. Ethan locked the door and leaned against it, breath trembling. The mask he'd worn all day cracked slightly as his reflection in the window stared back, pale, anxious, hunted. At the station later that evening, Detective Dlamini laid the photos from the house on her desk. She circled the broken lock, the overturned chair, and the faint paint streak. None of it screamed murder. But something about Ethan Mwangi's calm, too perfect composure, unsettled her. Run the lab on that paint sample, she told her partner, and check his phone records from Friday night. Think he did it? The partner asked. Dlamini didn't answer immediately. She just stared at the photograph of the house, her expression thoughtful. Let's just say, she murmured, his story doesn't quite fit the storm. Outside, thunder rumbled again, distant but familiar, like an echo returning to where it began. The next morning, Detective Amina Dlamini sat in her office, sipping coffee gone cold. The file marked Lydia Mwangi. Missing person lay open before her, but it was Ethan's name that kept circling in her mind. His tone had been calm, too calm, like a man rehearsing lines from a script. Still, her instincts whispered something deeper. People who lied often left traces not in their words, but in what they avoided saying. By mid-morning, her partner, Inspector Kamau, walked in holding a slim folder. Got something, he said. Phone records show Lydia made several late-night calls to a number saved as R. Last one was at 9:47 p.m. on Friday, about an hour before she went missing. Dlamini's eyebrows lifted. Run the number. Kamau nodded. Belongs to a man named Raymond Okoth. Works at a construction firm. Same projects Ethan's company oversees. Dlamini leaned back, thinking. So our missing woman was calling one of her husband's subcontractors. Interesting. She stood. Let's go talk to him. Raymond Okoth lived in a modest apartment overlooking the railway line. He was in his early 30s, with a lean frame and tired eyes. The kind of man who worked long hours and trusted no one easily. When the detectives introduced themselves, he hesitated before letting them in. Do you know why we're here? Dlamini asked gently. He nodded. It's about Lydia. Tell me about her, she said. He exhaled shakily. We met 2 years ago through work. It started as friendship. Ethan was always distant, always controlling her. She'd call me when she felt trapped. I didn't mean for it to become more. More? Kamau asked. Raymond looked away. We were seeing each other. Quietly. She told me she was going to leave him. That night, Friday, she said she'd finally done it. She sounded scared, though. Said Ethan found out. Dlamini's pen stopped mid-note. He knew about you? Yes, Raymond whispered. He wasn't supposed to. I think she left something behind. Maybe a message, a letter. She said she'd meet me that night after the storm calmed down, but she never came. Dlamini watched his trembling hands. "Did you go to her house?" He shook his head. "No. I thought about it, but I didn't want trouble. If he saw me there—" He trailed off, guilt flickering across his face. "I should have gone." "Where were you that night?" "At home," he said quickly. "Alone. You can check my call log. I tried calling her again at 10:15, but the line was dead." Kamal jotted something down, but Dlamini's focus stayed fixed on Raymond. His voice carried honesty, but beneath it was something heavier. Fear, maybe, or shame. "Did Lydia ever mention a safe place?" she asked. "Somewhere she'd go if she was in danger?" Raymond frowned. "Yes, she had a small property near the coast. Her late father's. She said she kept old things there, letters, photos, family papers. But it's been locked for years." Dlamini closed her notebook. "Thank you, Mr. Okoth. We may need you again." As they stepped back into the hallway, Kamal sighed. So she had a lover, a secret getaway, and a controlling husband. Could be she ran off. Dlamini shook her head. If she ran off, she'd have taken her car, her purse, something. She left behind too much. And that man, he's hiding something, but not guilt, fear. She paused at the car door. "Let's check that coastal property. If she kept records there, maybe one of them tells us what she planned before she disappeared." As they drove off, rain began to fall again, soft, steady, cleansing, back at his office across town. Ethan watched it through the window, the reflection of his face pale and fractured in the glass. He thought he'd buried every trace of Lydia's secret life. But now, as thunder rolled faintly in the distance, he realized one thing he hadn't accounted for: Raymond Okoth. And Raymond, somewhere in his apartment, stared at his ringing phone, Ethan's name glowing on the screen. He hesitated before answering. Detective Amina Dlamini stood before the old coastal house as the wind whipped through the palm trees. The structure was small and neglected, its paint peeling, windows coated in salt. It didn't look like the kind of place someone would hide a secret. But her instincts told her otherwise. She glanced at Inspector Kamal. "Let's go in." Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and ocean dampness. A thin layer of sand had blown in through the cracks beneath the door. Faded photographs hung crooked on the walls. Lydia's parents, a childhood birthday, a wedding picture. The one of Ethan and Lydia together had been turned face down. Kamal moved toward the back room. No signs of struggle, just storage boxes and old clothes. "Search carefully," Dlamini said, pulling on gloves. "People don't keep hidden houses for nothing." She began checking drawers, notebooks, and half-filled envelopes. Most of the documents were mundane, property deeds, family letters, until she found a small, leather-bound journal tucked inside a desk. On the first page, written in Lydia's tidy handwriting, were the words, "If anything happens to me, don't believe what Ethan says." Dlamini's pulse quickened. "Kamal," she called. "You need to see this." He leaned over her shoulder as she flipped through the pages. Lydia's notes detailed months of suspicion, Ethan's late nights, strange phone calls, unexplained bank transfers. One entry stood out, dated a week before her disappearance. "I found out who she is. The woman from his office. I confronted him, and he smiled, said no one would believe me if I spoke. I think he's planning something. I need to tell Raymond." Dlamini exhaled slowly. So the marriage was breaking apart from both ends. Kamal frowned. If Ethan knew she was documenting all this, he'd have motive to silence her. They continued searching until Kamal noticed a stain near the kitchen floor. Faint, grayish, irregular. "This looks like the same stuff from the Mwangi house." Dlamini crouched down, rubbing a gloved finger over it. Industrial primer again. She stood, realization dawning. He used the same material in both places. That's not coincidence. Kamal straightened. "You think he came here? Or he didn't want anyone to know he'd already been here?" As they stepped outside, the late afternoon light painted the ocean in dark steel tones. Dlamini looked toward the waves, her expression distant. Something about the primer nagged at her, a detail too small to ignore. "Get the lab to compare the sample from this house with the one from his kitchen," she said. "If they match, we can prove he was here after Lydia disappeared." Later that evening, back in the city, Ethan paced his office, restless. The call with Raymond replayed in his mind, the man's voice trembling, almost accusing. "Don't call me again, Ethan," Raymond had said. "If they find out anything, I'm done." Ethan had tried to sound calm. "There's nothing to find. Just keep quiet." But his own words didn't convince him anymore. When he returned home, the house felt colder. The faint buzz of his phone drew his eyes to a new message, unknown number. "We need to talk. It's about Lydia. Meet me tomorrow." His heart pounded. He typed back quickly. "Who is this?" No reply came. He stood there in the quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, until his gaze landed on the doorframe, the one the detective had touched. He saw it now, a small, overlooked trace, a piece of gray primer stuck to the hinge, visible only under the right light. He froze. That one detail, the one he thought invisible, had followed him. Detective Amina Dlamini sat in the precinct's dim briefing room, the sound of rain drumming softly on the windows. In front of her, the lab report glowed on her tablet screen. The chemical signature of the industrial primer from Ethan Mwangi's kitchen matched perfectly with the sample from Lydia's coastal house. Her lips curved into a quiet, grim smile. "He was there," she whispered, after she disappeared. Inspector Kamal looked over her shoulder. "That's enough for a warrant, isn't it?" "Not yet," she said, her tone measured. "He's too careful. We need him to reveal himself." Kamal frowned. "You're thinking of baiting him." She nodded. "We'll use what he fears most, exposure." That evening, Ethan arrived home to find an unmarked envelope slipped under his door. Inside was a single photo, a picture of Lydia standing in front of the coastal house, alive, smiling, her hand resting on the doorframe. On the back, a message was written in black ink. "She told me everything. Meet me where it started." There was no name, but Ethan didn't need one. The handwriting, the location. It could only be Raymond. Panic and fury collided inside him. He grabbed his coat, his breath coming fast. He'd been so careful. He'd wiped every trace, every tool, every footprint. How could something still remain? By the time he reached the coastal road, the storm had rolled in again, just as it had the night Lydia vanished. The sky cracked open with lightning as he parked his car near the dunes and stepped out, the sea wind biting cold against his face. He could see the faint outline of the house in the distance, one light glowing faintly through the window. He clenched his fists and walked toward it. Inside, the single bulb flickered weakly, casting uneven shadows. On the table sat a small recorder and a folded note. He opened it. "Press play." He hesitated, then pressed a button. Lydia's voice filled the room, trembling but clear. "If you're hearing this, it means you found me or what's left of me. I was right about you, Ethan. You can hide your affairs, your money, your lies, but you can't hide your temper. You can't hide the truth forever." The words sliced through him. He smashed the recorder against the wall, his breath ragged. "Where are you, Raymond?" he shouted. "Show yourself." From outside, headlights flickered through the rain. A car door slammed. Ethan turned sharply, ready to strike, ready to silence. But it wasn't Raymond who stepped through the doorway. It was Detective Dlamini. She stood calm, soaked in the storm, eyes steady on him. "Evening, Mr. Mwangi," she said. "Didn't expect to see you here again." His expression hardened. "What are you doing here?" "Following a lead," she said simply. "The same one that brought you." Ethan's gaze darted to the recorder fragments. She followed it, then looked back at him. "You destroyed evidence, Mr. Mwangi. That's not something innocent men do." He exhaled slowly, trying to regain control. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I do," Dlamini said softly, stepping closer. "The primer, the coastal visit, the broken lock. You cleaned everything except one thing, your own pattern." Her words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate. Outside, more lights flashed, police vehicles pulling up quietly behind the dunes. Ethan realized too late what this was. A trap. He took a step back toward the rear exit, but Kamal was already there, blocking the way. "Ethan Mwangi," Dlamini said firmly, "you're under arrest for suspected murder of Lydia Mwangi." Rain thundered as he dropped to his knees, his voice breaking. "You don't understand. It wasn't supposed to happen. She fell." Dlamini's face didn't change. "Then you'll have a chance to tell the world that." As they led him away, lightning illuminated the sea, wild, relentless, and unforgiving. And back inside the house, the broken recorder clicked once more, the red light still blinking. Lydia's final words whispered faintly through the static. One detail always survives. The interrogation room was cold. Not the kind of cold that came from air conditioning, but from silence. Ethan Mwangi sat hunched over the metal table, wrists cuffed, his reflection fractured in the one-way glass. He hadn't spoken in hours. Detective Amina Dlamini entered quietly, a folder tucked under her arm. She set it down in front of him and sat opposite, her calmness steady but unyielding. "You've been quiet," she said. "That's unusual for a man who says it was all a mistake." Ethan's eyes were red-rimmed, his voice hoarse. "You've already decided I'm guilty." "I've decided you're hiding something," she replied evenly. "And I think you're tired of pretending." She opened the folder. Inside were photographs. Lydia's journal, the broken lock, the primer residue, the coastal house. One by one, she slid them toward him like pieces of a puzzle. "Every story you told," she said softly, "fell apart because of one detail. The primer. You used it to seal the floor where she fell. But it's the same brand your company uses, only available to authorized architects. That's how we found you." Ethan's fingers twitched, but he said nothing. Dlamini leaned forward slightly. "You're not a monster, Ethan. Not at first. You were angry, betrayed. But then you made a choice to fix it, to erase her. The cover-up became the crime." His breathing grew uneven. "You think you know everything," he muttered, "but you don't know her." "Then tell me," she said quietly. "Tell me what happened that night." For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Then Ethan's voice broke through, raw and trembling. "She told me she was leaving," he said, "that she was in love with him. Raymond, I laughed at first. Thought she was just trying to hurt me. But when she said she was taking the house, the accounts, everything, I lost it." He rubbed his face, tears streaking the edges of his fingers. "We fought. She slapped me and I pushed her. I swear to God, I didn't mean to." She hit her head on the counter. She stopped moving. It was so quiet after that. Dlamini's expression remained neutral, though her eyes softened briefly. "You could have called for help." "I wanted to," he whispered. "But then I saw the blood, the open door, the storm outside. I panicked. I cleaned everything. I thought if no one found her, maybe I could start over." "Start over?" she repeated. "With who?" He hesitated. "There was someone at work. Just a distraction. Nothing serious." She nodded slowly. Lydia knew about her. She wrote about it in her journal. Ethan closed his eyes. She always wrote everything down, even the things that should have stayed between us. The room fell silent again. Dlamini studied him. The once composed architect, now reduced to a man unraveling under the weight of truth. Finally, she stood. "You'll have to tell this to the court, not just me." As she gathered her papers, Ethan spoke again, voice low. "Detective, will they find her?" Dlamini paused by the door. "We already did." He froze, head snapping up. "What?" She turned, her gaze steady. "The tides shifted after the storm. A fisherman found remains tangled in debris near the inlet. Dental records confirmed it this morning." Ethan's breath caught. For the first time, he had nothing to say. His world, built on control, denial, and arrogance, finally collapsed. As Dlamini left the room, Kamal waited outside. "He confessed?" "Partly," she said. "Enough to close the case." Kamal nodded, watching through the glass as Ethan buried his face in his hands. Hard to believe one man could lose everything over one mistake. Dlamini's eyes lingered on the scene. "It wasn't one mistake," she murmured. "It was one detail he thought no one would see." Outside, dawn began to break. Soft light spilling over the city. A new day, but one forever shadowed by what had been uncovered. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Ethan Mwangi's handcuffs clinking as he was led to the witness stand. Outside, the morning sun shone brightly, but inside it felt heavy, air thick with judgment and memory. Reporters filled the back rows, cameras ready to capture the downfall of the man once hailed as one of Nairobi's most promising architects. Detective Amina Dlamini sat near the front, her expression unreadable. She had seen many trials, but this one carried a different weight. It wasn't just about guilt. It was about how far truth had to be dragged into the light before anyone dared to believe it. Ethan's lawyer stood beside him, whispering something in his ear, but Ethan wasn't listening. His gaze was fixed on the empty chair beside the prosecution, the space where Lydia might have sat. When the prosecutor rose, her tone was sharp but calm. "Mr. Mwangi, you've admitted to concealing evidence and misleading investigators. But today, I want to understand why. Why go through such lengths?" Ethan's eyes flickered toward the gallery, where Raymond Oko sat quietly, his face pale with guilt. "I was angry," Ethan began, his voice hollow. "Angry at her for leaving. Angry at him for taking what was mine. I thought, if no one knew, if I erased it all, maybe I could still control." His words echoed through the room, heavy with regret. The prosecutor stepped closer. Control or pride? He looked down. Both. The jury watched him, some with disgust, others with pity. The man before them wasn't a cold-blooded killer, but a coward running from his own reflection. The prosecution played the recovered audio, fragments of Lydia's final recording from the coastal house. Her voice trembled through the speakers. "You can't hide forever, Ethan. Truth has a way of finding you, even when you bury it deep." Ethan closed his eyes. Each word cut deeper than any sentence could. When it was over, the prosecutor turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the evidence and confession speak for themselves. We see conviction for manslaughter and obstruction of justice. The defense tried to soften the edges, citing temporary rage, emotional breakdown, human weakness. But nothing could erase the image of a woman who had trusted love and met her end because of it. After hours of deliberation, the verdict came guilty. Ethan didn't react. He simply stared ahead, hollow-eyed, as the judge delivered the sentence. 25 years. In the gallery, Raymond lowered his head, a tear slipping down his cheek. The weight of his own silence pressed hard. Dlamini noticed but said nothing. They were all paying for truth in different ways. Outside the courthouse, the crowd buzzed with questions. Microphones thrust toward Dlamini as she stepped down the marble steps. "Detective, did you always suspect him? Was it premeditated? Do you think justice was served?" She paused for a moment, meeting the cameras with calm composure. "Justice isn't clean," she said. "It costs people, sometimes the innocent, sometimes the guilty. But truth always demands payment." Her words made the evening news, but she didn't stay to watch. Instead, she drove to the coast the next day, to the weather-beaten house that had started it all. Inside, the wind whistled through cracked shutters. The desk still stood where Lydia's journal had been found. Dlamini placed a small bouquet of white lilies there. No ceremony, no words, just quiet acknowledgement. As she turned to leave, she noticed something small glinting beneath the window, a piece of glass on the broken recorder, still reflecting light after all this time. She smiled faintly. Picking it up, "You were right, Lydia," she whispered. "One detail always survives." The sea roared beyond the cliffs, endless, unforgiving, yet strangely peaceful. And as the detective walked back to her car, the wind carried a faint echo of the past, fading but never gone.